Welcome to Connected, a podcast of the Thrive approach. My name is Liz Parks and I'm Thrive's PR officer. Thrive trains teachers and other professionals working with children and young people to support their well-being in order to prevent mental health issues. Our approach is underpinned by neuroscience, attachment theory and child development research and is widely used in schools, nurseries and specialist educational settings across England and Wales. Have a look at our website thriveapproach.com to find out more about us and our training. As usual, today's episode is in two sections. First up, we're going to hear from Mona Diller-Hook, a California-based clinical and consulting paediatric psychologist specialising in supporting children and families. Mona is the author of the book Beyond Behaviours, Using Brain Science and Compassion to Understand and Solve Children's Behavioural Challenges, and is one of two keynote speakers who will be delivering webinars in the next couple of months as part of our Forging New Connections series. This is part of the annual CPD programme for Thrive licensed practitioners and offers the chance to hear insights and analysis from experts in the field of mental health and child development. After that, we're going to hear from Christopher Harrison from Grove Road Community Primary School in Yorkshire, who's going to be talking about his belief that children need to be emotionally ready before they can be learning ready. So let's get started. So thank you very much for joining us today. I'd like to start, if it's okay, by talking about your book, which was an excellent read. And in it, you talk about body up behaviour and brain down behaviour, which I personally found a really useful explanation. Could you explain a bit about those two terms and also why it's so important to differentiate between the two behaviours?
Sure. And thank you for reading the book. I'm really interested in drilling down on what children's behaviors mean. And not only children, but all of us, on human behaviors. And what we've discovered, not we, but neuroscientists and people who look at the brain and behaviors have uncovered in the last really 10 or 20 years is that there are many categories of behaviors, and our behaviors are informed from what's happening in our body. And so traditionally in our education systems really across the world, and especially here in the United States, probably in the UK as well, we think of behaviors as incentivized. We think of them as purposeful. As a child, if the child can talk and can understand and listen, we think of behaviors as the child doing it on purpose. So conscious intention is associated with basically with all behaviors. And what I'm pointing out is that not all behaviors are reflective of willful malintent. In other words, when a child has a challenging behavior, it doesn't mean that they're choosing to do the wrong thing. It oftentimes means, especially if the behaviors are very challenging, it often means that the child is in what we call a stress response. So the body is experiencing stress. The way the nervous system takes care of that stress and helps the child to adapt to that stress is by initiating a type of movement. Usually it's a fast movement, and that could be in the form of yelling, screaming, hitting, pushing, shoving, or running. And this is reflective of a behavior that is body up and not top down. So that's a long answer to your very good question about why should we even know the difference. And one reason why we should know the difference is that we don't want to punish children whose behaviors are stress responses. And that's one of my central messages for parents and educators is right there, is that we really should think about the different types of meanings that underlie behaviors.
It's kind of behaviour as a symptom of the problem rather than the problem itself, isn't it?
Absolutely. The behavior is what we can see, but it doesn't tell us about what the triggers or causes are. So it's a symptom. That's a great way to put it.
Approaches such as yours are beginning to be much more widespread. There are a number of experts who share that view, and neuroscience backs it up. But it's still something which, particularly in many schools and for many parents, they, I think, struggle with that and do see it as they do take a punitive response to it. Do you think that views such as your own are now gaining preeminence? Do you think it is gaining traction? Or do you think there's still a very long way to go to really get that point across?
Well, that's an interesting question as well. So I'll answer it in two ways. I think we have a very long way to go, but I'm very hopeful at the same time. So the the models in which our systems of care, in particular our education system, views behaviors still relies on compliance and non-compliance, and also rewards and consequences. And I was reading an article about what you have in the UK called behavior hubs, ways to support schools to help children have better behaviors, which is a noble goal, no doubt. But I was also reading that one of the issues that the behavior hubs use, or one of the techniques they use, are rewarding good behaviors. And I would have to say that again, throughout the world, when you have to resort to rewarding good behaviors and either ignoring or punishing what we would consider air quotes bad behaviors, is the older paradigm. So yes, I'm optimistic that the kinds of work that I and others are doing is gaining traction. But I'm very realistic in seeing that the behavioral model is still the preeminent model in most of our Western countries.
I don't know about in America, but in the UK, there's quite a lot of debate at the moment in light of a pandemic and the disruptions that's caused to education. And the government has been using a term here of catch up, which it refers to attainment. And there's very much a debate here in the education system about catch up, and should it be catch up of attainment and lessons and targets, or should it be catch up of play and social time and kind of just more gentle activities? I recognise you're a long way away from the UK, but what would your take on that debate be?
Well, and I love the question, and I love that it's a debate. I love that there is a question, because in the UK, then you are ahead of the game and even bringing up, which do we prioritize? Do we go for attainment of lost skills, academic skills, and those things that children may have missed out on over the past year? Or do we go for maybe something more developmentally basic? And that is first attending to our children's physical and emotional health, which is the underpinning, the foundation of the ability to learn. So that's what I would suggest. That's what I'm suggesting to the school districts that I advise here in the United States, and that is, as tempting as it is to want to catch our children up very quickly academically so that they don't have long-term negative impacts on their education, I am way more concerned about our children's mental health and their emotional foundation for learning, which is called state regulation or physiological regulation. It's a big word, but what it means is you cannot learn unless your body is in a position to learn. And what do children need right now in order to learn? They need more play. They need their friends. They need to run. They need to create. They need to get back into the social engagement system. So that is my suggestion is, of course, we can look at helping them catch up academically. To me, that is very much more easy than helping them catch up from an emotional regulation standpoint. And that's what adults and children around the world have taken the biggest hit on.
If anyone is struggling to manage the behaviour of children and young people that they have in their lives, and I'm thinking either as a parent or as an educator, what would you say the starting point is? If they have this awareness of, behaviour as communication of unmet need, where should they go with that? How should they begin to implement things and to learn new strategies to deal with behaviour and to see it differently?
I think the first step is, for me, for most everything, is always having a bit of self-compassion. So if you're in a position where you're a parent or a teacher and you're witnessing children with challenging behaviors, it's difficult and it's hard and it's stressful. And and it's a big responsibility. So a bit of self-compassion goes a long way to where you can just say, wow, this is difficult. I'm in a difficult time, and may I be gentle on myself right now, knowing that we are observing almost a secondary pandemic of challenging behaviors because children's nervous systems and our own as adults are so stressed out. So, self compassion, A, and B, just allow yourself to look at the behaviors from a different lens. Allow yourself to look at a behavior not as the result of your poor parenting or not enough consistency or not being a proper enough teacher. Look at it through a different lens, and that helps us to really view the child with more compassion. And we can say, oh, maybe this behavior is reflecting, like you said, an unmet need, or maybe this behavior is reflecting a nervous system in the state of fight or flight, which is what I call the red pathway of the nervous system. So we can begin to open our lens. Like, think of it as an aperture on a camera. Open the lens wider and give yourself and the child a bigger range of reasons underlying the behavior.
I think that it's that thing, isn't it? When one reframes something, we arrive at a different conclusion, don't we? And it's just taking that pause, and that's when the change can come in. Just looking again in the context of the pandemic, in terms of as we move forwards into recovery, what would you say are the opportunities that we have as a society, and maybe the education system in particular, to support our children and young people?
Well, the opportunity is that we are all, parents, educators, system makers. We've all experienced this trauma, this global trauma. So one of the benefits of experiencing a trauma together is to have a reset, a global reset on what our priorities are. And to me, this is an amazing opportunity to look at what we are going to experience as, again, our children are more stressed. We will be having more difficulties or observing more difficulties in people's emotional and behavioral control. And I don't know if any of your listeners can relate to this, but I know certainly for myself, my own tolerance for small things, my distress tolerance has not improved during the pandemic. Right? Little things can really throw me off right now. And so if we can have this reset on, oh my goodness, now we have a front row seat on what it looks like and what it feels like to experience toxic stress, and for some of us trauma, depending on our, on our own individual differences and human variability, to place a new way of supporting our children, a new way that is based on psychological attunement and not behavioral management. And that is something I'm very excited about, because neuroscience is unequivocal. Emotional attunement is better for brains than behavior management.
How about, I mean, you mentioned one of the things you'd observed in yourself as a result of this last period of time with the pandemic. What have your experiences been in terms of learning? What have you learned in terms of coping strategies? What has helped you? And what have you done? What steps have you taken to really look after yourself in this last period?
Well, boy, we all have our stories, right? The last year, the year of 2020, when the shutdown happened for California. I was on my way back from a speaking engagement in the northern part of the country, in Seattle, Washington. And I had about 10 to 15 public speaking engagements planned for last year. I was traveling a lot and really enjoying it. This is part of my career now that I'm not practicing in my office quite as much, but I'm training and talking to people and hugging people and shaking hands and everything. So when that disappeared overnight, literally when I came back, all my appearances with the public and with engaging with people got taken away. That was a big hit on me personally, not only from the level of excitement about my work, but also not being able to see my own mother, my mother in her mid 80s, and who I adore and doesn't live too far from me, but we, those kinds of things, my mom, my children, my adult children, and not being able to see them. So it did take a heavy toll. I was sad, and I was coping with that reality, as I'm sure we all were, right? What does this mean? Who's safe? Do we want to see people, or do we want to just make sure everyone stays healthy? So we chose to isolate, and everyone thankfully stayed healthy. However, I had a wonderful opportunity come up in April of 2020, and that was, I was offered the opportunity to write another book, a parenting book this time. And so it was my saving grace. What turned out to be 8 or 10 hours a day of working was my joy, and it was a wonderful distraction. So I wrote a big book in 8 months, which probably before would have taken me 2 or 3 years to write.
It's funny how things work out, and how if you see things as an opportunity, what does open up from the most difficult of circumstances. And have you been able to? I'm not sure where California is in terms of lockdown and restrictions. Have you been able to see your mum again?
Yes, about a month ago. So it was in, let's see, are we March? It was in March, or early March, because we have had a very successful vaccination rollout, at least for where I live in my locality. So grateful for that, that we were all vaccinated, and that was the biggest hug, and we could hardly let go of each other. And then all the restaurants, we couldn't find, we wanted to go out to eat because we hadn't sat outside in a cafe for years and years. And so we found one place that had burgers, and we sat outside eating hamburgers and giggling for an hour at just the joy in the rain of eating burgers at one place that we could find. So yeah, who would have known that a simple lunch with your mom would become such a joy?
Oh, that sounds fabulous. Obviously, we're very much looking forward to your webinar in July. And I just wonder if, without giving too much away, you can just give listeners a bit of a flavour of what you'll be talking about, and just kind of set the scene for that webinar.
Oh, well, and I'm so excited about it. I am thrilled to be a part of the series, and I've got all sorts of fun things planned. But I'm going to be talking about what I call the developmental iceberg. So how behaviors, as we alluded today, how behaviors are only the tip of the iceberg, and what lies beneath the waterline, the invisible part, and how we can use that information as parents and caregivers to help our children, particularly children who are struggling with behavioral challenges. And I'll be describing in detail why we have different methods other than rewards and consequences to help children with their challenging behaviors. So I'll be discussing kind of what are the alternatives to rewards and consequences, because many of us are so familiar with doing things a certain way. And I'll be explaining how neuroscience can better help us understand our children and inform our systems in ourselves towards a more compassionate and neuroscience-based view, a holistic view of human behaviors.
That sounds great, and that certainly sounds like something I need to listen to, so I shall look forward to that. Mona, thank you so much for joining us for the podcast. It's been great talking to you and hearing more about your work. And yes, just really looking forward to hearing more in the webinar.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm just thrilled and so much looking forward to it.
Thank you so much to Mona for sharing some really valuable insights there. And it's great to get an idea of what to expect from her webinar, which will be taking place on July the 9th. Have a look at thriveapproach.com thrive-training/keynote to find out more or to book a place. Next up, we're talking to Christopher Harrison, Assistant Head Teacher and Key Stage 2 Lead at Grove Road Community Primary School in Harrogate. Grove Road has really embedded mental wellbeing at the heart of school life and has even rewritten its curriculum around it to really emphasise how fundamental mental wellbeing is to creating happy, confident learners. The school has done this using the Thrive approach and also metacognition, where children are encouraged to have an awareness and understanding of their own thought processes.
So my name's Christopher Harrison. I'm an assistant head teacher and year 6 class teacher and Key Stage 2 lead at Grove Road Community Primary School in Harrogate in North Yorkshire. We are one of the largest schools in North Yorkshire with 1.5 form entry, with about 330 children on roll, and quite a large nursery unit in years 1 through to year 6. We use Thrive as sort of one of the cornerstones of our school that I'm hoping to talk to you about today and kind of elaborate on a little bit further. We've got quite an unusual intake compared to the rest of North Yorkshire as well. We're over 30% of our children on the special needs register, and we've just got our 20th EHCP in place. Our 19th and 20th came through yesterday. So we're quite unusual compared to the rest of the schools around us.
And I know it's something that the teaching staff work very hard on, creating that atmosphere. And part of that is having a focus on the unique child, isn't it? And seeing every child as an individual with individual needs. And I know you use Thrive and also metacognition to develop this. Could you tell me a bit more about that? You know, why you feel it's so important to regard each child as a unique individual, and how Thrive and metacognition sort of work together to allow you to put this at the centre of school life?
So our school values, we call our pride values, and that's passion, resilience, intrepidity, dependability, and empathy. And from those values, we've written our curriculum of pride. So they're the bedrock of our curriculum. And intertwined with those are what we call prime areas of learning, and it's very similar to Development Matters, which is a really common early years document. The idea being that we look at these dispositions and behaviours of children that then facilitate their ability to access their learning. In a way, a bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can't reach self-actualization without feeling safe, without feeling happy, without feeling nurtured and respected and welcomed, and the various other sort of underpinning aspects. So part of the foundations of our curriculum, two sort of big cornerstones, are Thrive and the metacognitive approach that we use. So firstly, with metacognition, we partnered with Rosendale Research School, and we were part of this an initiative in terms of driving high quality metacognitive teaching practice across schools. So we have weekly metacognition lessons. We have a really heavy focus on discussions around learning, not just looking at the outcome, not just looking at the progress, but also the process of how children learn, and educating the children on how their brains might work and what helps them to learn and what helps them to be successful. The idea behind that being that we're not teaching children to pass tests, we're teaching children how to learn and how to support themselves as learners. And Thrive sits really nicely hand in hand with that, because it's very much about getting to know who you are as an individual and getting to love and respect and cherish who you are and celebrate who you are and how you're different to everybody else. So we've written the sort of Reflect Ed, Rosendale metacognition practice and Thrive into our curriculum model itself. So we start with our pride values, which then come through to our prime areas, and that includes things like children developing an understanding of who they are and their identity. So developing an identity is one of the strands within that, and that's been constructed very much from the sort of scales within the Thrive approach. And then with all of that underpinning children's development, that enables them to then access the broader curriculum, which we call subject specialisms. So the theory being, you can't be a writer unless you've got the disposition towards learning to give it a go, to take risks, to have self-confidence, self-belief, and try new things. You wouldn't be able to write without those things, and you'll never develop and thrive within your writing without those key steps before it. And then that features in all of our interventions. So if a child's struggling as a writer, the worst thing you can do is then force that child to write more. And it's a really common intervention practice. You're struggling as a writer, your handwriting's weak, just do more handwriting. Here's a handwriting intervention that you're going to do 4 times a week. And that's a quick fix. It's looking at the immediate problem, but it's not unpicking the cause of that problem. And it might be that child's fine motor skills. It might be that child's resilience or their self-respect and their self-belief that they can do it. It might be their reading. And our curriculum we've designed to intertwine all these things together to know that everything influences each other. So as a writer, that's influenced by your gross and fine motor skills. It's influenced by your speaking. It's influenced by your listening and your oracy skills. But it's also influenced by your intrepidity as to if you want to give it a go and take a risk, or if you're passionate about what you're doing. So that's kind of how Thrive and metacognition sit within our curriculum. It's a very malleable beast where everything links and everything intertwines, and you can't have something without the others, which links very closely back to Development Matters, where you've got these 17 areas of learning and everything is so carefully intertwined and everything has a knock-on effect on everything else. And we believe that that's crucial because we're not just teaching our children to pass maths tests, we're teaching our children to be competent mathematicians who can then use their skill sets to develop their understanding independently in their future lives.
Because I think when we've spoken previously, you've mentioned the real difference between the curriculum in early years and the curriculum at Key Stage 1, and how the early years curriculum is very focused on kind of personal attributes, resilience, kindness, etc. And then at Key Stage 1, it kind of narrows and goes more onto attainment, phonics, writing, etc. And I think you've said previously that you were keen to kind of have that emphasis on personal attributes in your curriculum. Is that correct?
Yeah, so Development Matters has the characteristics of effective learning, which are kind of your dispositions towards learning, going into your prime areas, which are like your underpinning skills. So your moving and handling, your communication and language, and then that facilitates your ability to access learning, so reading, writing. And for some reason, when children finish reception, that stops, and the focus becomes the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. And that's because we live in a country where we have such a strong push for accountability within our assessment structures. So it's natural that teachers will focus on those assessed areas to which they're held to account. It's a natural thing to happen. And obviously I could get my soapbox out and tell you, I could really give you a good old speech about my beliefs around SATs and testing children at such young ages. But at the heart of it, we believe that there's quite a big gap between reception and year 1. And that a lot of the things that are most important within early years, such as the characteristics of learning, they're not neglected because so many schools do it so well, but they're not explicit within curriculum models, and they're not necessarily developed and pushed in the same way, and there's not interventions around them in the same way that there is for a child who's struggling with their maths attainment, for example, or a child who's struggling with their phonics, purely because they are assessed outcomes. And it's really difficult to assess dispositions towards learning. You can do pupil voice surveys and things like that, but it is a difficult thing to quantify. But our argument is that, if you have good dispositions towards learning, if you have self-respect and self-esteem and these various different things that we focus on, that 100%, anecdotally from our point of view, guarantees greater levels of progress and engagement with learning. I'm a big believer in, I love the idea of going to secondary schools and asking how children do in years 7, 8, and 9. And I would want those schools to know that these are Grove Road children that come to them, not because of their SATs results, but because when they come to that school, they continue to thrive and have a hunger for learning. And I think that's a core part of the problem is, with the emphasis on SATs in year 6, it's so easy to teach children to focus in on that assessed outcome. Whereas we want to focus in, going back to the original point, we want to focus in on the unique child, and that every child has a right to be loved and cherished and appreciated. They have a right to be an expert in something, and that doesn't have to be reading, writing, or maths. It could be anything. They could be the best skateboarder in the building. They could do karate. They could be a brilliant artist. And the more we can celebrate and focus on the unique child rather than focusing in and celebrating attainment of cohorts, the better we will be able to support children's emotional well-being as they grow older. And that's more important now than ever. The impacts of COVID are going to last decades. And I think if we can celebrate the unique child now, then in 20 years' time, they'll be able to overcome barriers that they might not overcome if we were forcing academia down their throat.
Because in a way, it's quite a brave decision to take that stance. It totally makes sense. And I think a lot of schools maybe well-being and sort of having that foundation is very much something they aim for. They understand the importance of it, but actually fundamentally putting it at the center of the curriculum is maybe a step beyond what many settings will be comfortable with. Now that you've actually done that, and am I right in thinking it's been in place for a couple of terms now?
Since September we launched. It was in development last academic year, and we launched with the staff in September.
Can you tell a difference with children in the school, or is it just a kind of building on the work you've done previously, so it's just extending what was already there?
So yeah, I think going back to your original point about some schools finding it quite challenging, I think there's definitely a discussion to be had there around how a lot of schools' values don't necessarily sit within their curriculum, and often they're two separate beasts. And some schools live and breathe their values, and they do that brilliantly, and then their curriculum model is a separate entity. And some schools have values that are a letterheading, and they don't live and breathe those values, and they might have different values that are perceived within the building. And I think it's really important that your values are the biggest thing in your school. They are the attributes that, even if it's a collection of 3 or 5 words, what that means to your school, that's your school's DNA, and that is incredibly important. And it doesn't matter what you've got in your curriculum, if the values in the building are not right, then children will not love learning, no matter what you throw at them. So it's really important that we get that intertwined nature between values and pedagogy and have those inseparable. It's crucial that we get that really nice mixture where children feel loved and respected and cherished, like I said before. I mean, a lot of our evidence is anecdotal and through pupil voice and through staff voice surveys, how people feel about teaching in the classrooms, and the feedback from families through our parent questionnaires. So there's some evidence in terms of that, but the main measure of these things is the happiness in the building. The main measure of these things, it's the behaviour. So we use My Concern as a behaviour log, and if children want to be in the building and they enjoy being in the building, then behaviour will get better naturally because children want to be there. If children feel respected, if children feel welcome, if children feel safe, then their behaviour, there's always going to be outliers that need to be explored in more depth. But for the bulk of the cohort, that is the turning point with behaviour and dispositions towards learning. So anecdotally, our children's engagement with learning, their resilience, their sort of bounce back ability from making mistakes is definitely improving over time. I think a big test of that has been COVID. So when we look at the weight of numbers that have engaged with the online learning at home, particularly families who have found it really challenging and have still pushed through, I think speaks volumes about the character of the children that we're lucky to teach. But also it shows how many of the families have bought into it, because the families are celebrating their children's success remotely and they're joining in and they're supporting. And it's hard. If you're working full time from home and you've got 3 children and 1 computer and you're trying to balance it at home, our parents, through the surveys we ran over lockdown learning, our parents felt very welcomed and very supported by that. We didn't run sort of scheduled live sessions. We had a couple of live check-ins a week, but we didn't run a full live timetable because it just wasn't suitable for our cohort. We've got quite a few working families, but we've also got quite big families at home where it's easier for the children to dip in and out of things over time. And I think that was a massive test of resilience for our community and our teachers. And I think the way our community handled it was incredible. And I know a lot of school communities handled it beautifully. And I think that is a massive signpost of a school's values merging well with the community's needs. And I think we did that well.
I was going to ask, actually, and you've kind of already answered it. I was going to ask about the feedback from staff and also parents, because that's kind of the acid test of what a school's doing and how well it's doing it, is how it all gels and everyone is kind of on the same page. And I guess from what you've just outlined, everyone is in terms of a school community.
This is the first school I've worked at where every member of staff in the building is completely aligned and on board. And also, in terms of our leadership structure, so our head, Chris Parkhouse, he works very much based on trust. I think that plays a big part in my personal happiness here, and I know it does for a lot of other staff. And we can look at the retention in our school. Our retention is incredible. We've had a couple of people retire, a couple of people move around a bit, but all in all, our retention is very, very good. And I'm used to working in really tough inner city schools where the turnover is sort of between 50 and 70% every 3 to 5 years, and that's scarily common. Whereas since I've been in this school, we've probably only had a handful of new staff come in and very few staff leave. Another thing, going back to supporting our staff as well, though, we've used Paul Garvey's Talk for Teaching writing in terms of our staff development structures, and that is very much focused in on those professional dialogues and supportive conversations and staff taking leadership of their own development, whether it's themselves or their curriculum areas or whatever. So we've removed all formal observations. We work on trust, and using these recording systems, we can really build up a bank of evidence that staff are comfortable showing, rather than putting them on the hot spot for an hour-long observation when it's inevitable that someone walks in when the kids are tidying up. It always happens. It's the nature of the beast. But yeah, so there's a lot rooted in trust. There's a lot rooted in care. There's a lot rooted in spreading the load fairly across the team to give everyone a fighting chance, rather than chunking a lot onto people with harsh deadlines and things like that. So we're very much running sort of a 2-year cycle in our growth. So we're looking at a 2-year cycle to build this curriculum model, get it embedded, build up the banks of evidence. We don't want everyone working late nights to put a curriculum model together in 2 weeks. I think a lot of schools are very fixated on the idea of outstanding. And I am a big believer in good being good enough. Because if you're good at something day in, day out, consistently, and, good over a long period of time is outstanding, because you get that constant drip, drip, drip of progress over years, decades, rather than just chasing for an outstanding grading and then taking your foot off the gas when you get it. Obviously, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, because there's a lot of outstanding schools out there that are absolutely brilliant and that absolutely smash it. But I have been in the schools where the year 6 attainment and the Ofsted grading are the measure of quality. And going right back to the start of our conversation, our measure of quality is the happiness and well-being of the unique child and their family. That's our measure of quality. And obviously that comes hand in hand with the happiness and well-being of the staff team. It goes back to the investment that schools are able and willing to make, because there's a lot of schools that their hands are tied. They have to get good results that year. They're in a difficult position because they might have a poor 2 or 3 year trend, and they have to get results immediately. And it's much harder to make an investment in well-being and happiness when all of your resources are allocated to getting good results in maths at the end of year 6. So I can totally empathise with the schools that are not in a position where they can grow something a little bit more steadily. We've got a sort of a 2-year window really before Ofsted are due to come back in. We're good at the moment, but our belief is that we want to grow this naturally over time, and that the outcomes will come as part of that, rather than forcing a couple of years of good results just to get the grading. But like I said, with academies, with local authorities, with Ofsted, with all of that accountability, it's an incredibly difficult conversation to justify to the person saying to you, well, your maths is too low. So we're in a good position where our governors are on board. It's come from the head teacher, it's across the team, but it's not him telling us to do it, it's the whole team saying this is what's right for our children.
Excellent. Chris, they were things I was very keen to chat through today, and it's been so nice to hear more about what you've done at Grove Road, and the outcomes you're getting. Is there anything you'd like to add that you feel we haven't touched on?
I think the main thing that I would want to make really clear with the way that we do things at our school is we don't do anything that's particularly outrageous. We don't do anything that's particularly unusual or out there. We turn up every day and we just do our best for the children, day in, day out. And that's every member of staff in the building. No matter what their position is in the building, they are treated as and respected as teachers. And that everybody knows that we have a duty to give our best for the children and just do that day in, day out. So we're not big believers in putting on all this flamboyant stuff and sharing it on social media and things like that. You know, we do have really nice lessons and launches to topics and stuff, and we share that as much as we can, but we don't believe in putting anything on for the day. We want our children to have a really nice diet of learning over time. And that's where the consistency within having the Thrive approach across school, the consistency with our pride values underpinning everything, and the metacognitive focus from nursery through to year 6, all of that consistency alongside having a very, very stable staff body has meant that we've been able to grow something really good. You know, I wish I could pull any teacher from any classroom in to talk to you about it, and they'd be saying the same about, you know, how proud we are of our children, how proud we are of our community, and the way that our school is pointing. I think any of them would quite happily chat for a decent chunk of time. Probably not as waffly as me, but they'd quite happily share that journey. And yeah, it's been a pleasure to see. It's been really nice to be part of. I'm in my 3rd year here, and I'm really enjoying being in a school where the child truly is the focus. And there's a lot of schools out there where that's the case. And there's some schools out there which I've worked in the past where the child's results are the focus. And that's not the school's fault necessarily. It's the way the systems of accountability work in this country. And, you know, we've had 2 years without SATs. I can't wait to see what's going to happen nationally over the next few years, because we now know that we don't need SATs. We now know that we can have all this time to focus in on our children, loving what they do in school and absolutely smashing it as they come towards the end of year 6 and just spreading their wings into secondary school. And that, to us, is the sign of success.
Thank you so much to Mona and Christopher for your time and expertise. There were some really useful insights and ideas there. And what really struck me was that although geographically you couldn't get much further apart than California and North Yorkshire, the ideas and ideals that inform both Christopher and Mona's professional lives are at heart very similar. To find out more about Mona and her practice, have a look at monadillahook.com. Hopefully you've enjoyed this episode of Connected, the Thrive Approach podcast. Look out for the next episode in June, which will look at the importance of self-care and well-being.